Well now, Ed Howker is author of The Jilted Generation. How do you feel about what's happened?
Well, I'm kind of shocked by the whole discussion this evening, actually. There was one group of people who in the recession did incredibly well. It's people who actually had retired. In fact, the number of them employed grew by 4% over the period of the recession. And in the meantime, we have 1.5 million young people, people aged under 30, who are unemployed. So if there is age discrimination, it feels to me that it takes the form of not preparing properly our young people for the world of work, not providing apprenticeships and jobs.
Do you worry, Barry Cryer, about the generational tension?
No, I think I'm in a business. I'm very lucky where there's such a mix of generations. I've just been up in Edinburgh doing the Fringe, you know, and you're just club members, family members. And of course, I'm very lucky here in this gathering tonight because nobody can retire me, nobody can lay me off. We don't retire in my business, the phone stops ringing and you think it's over. No, I'm my own boss and I make my own mistakes and don't suffer from other people's. I'm not part of a structure in that way.
So you think you're privileged?
Yes, I do. I think I've got a solid basis of insecurity.
Looking at the broader raft of people who are not in this position, well, you've already seemed to suggest that there is a particular responsibility borne by the baby boomer generation.
Yeah.
What is that? Do you feel guilty?
I don't feel guilty, but I'm aware that my generation had it good, and I take your point. I mean, I think that if you're in your 60s, you, through absolutely no dint of your own effort, will be sitting on significant equity in your house because of the great boom in house prices that's taken place, which isn't going to be reproduced in the next generation. You will have a reasonable pension, and you know the 20-somethings, and particularly the 18 to 24-year-olds, have got it very raw. The labour market is not open for them. They have huge debts, as has been referred to on the film, and the intergenerational relationship isn't balanced. Now, you know, some parents, you know, the bank of mum and dad can support their kids and do, others don't, and that's another source of inequity.
Ros Altman, you're shaking your head there.
I think we have to be very careful here in this discussion. Yes, of course, there are many university leavers, young school leavers as well, who have found it and are finding it very difficult to find work. That is a problem. But equally, what we mustn't forget is that the other end of the scale, people in their 50s and 60s, many of them, millions of them, haven't got a pension. They haven't got anything to look forward to retire on. There are some that have. Most people in their 50s have probably still got a mortgage to pay off. If their private pensions haven't worked out, there is an issue here that says, actually, there's a problem all round across the piece. It's not a generational issue.
She seems to be saying something completely at odds with what
No,
you're
I
saying.
do completely disagree, let me be clear. I mean, there are a whole series of issues. Well, there are a whole series of issues related. I mean, pension and poverty in Britain is aggressive and horrific, and it turns out that the winter fuel allowance, for example, does not stop the 20,000 or so very poor elderly people dying in winter as a proportion of additional mortality.
It goes to people like me who don't need it.
Exactly right.
Exactly.
So, you know, there are very clear places where instant reform can happen. But actually, if we do want to use the state in whatever capacity, be it major or minor, to actually help people in retirement in those very difficult circumstances you lay out, then, you know, there are some people who are going to have to cop for it, and that's my generation. So getting us jobs is quite important.
Nearly half...
But you're what, you're late 20s, aren't you?
Yeah.
James Munro, you're 21?
Yeah.
A student?
Yeah.
What's it seem like to you?
It's quite confronting, really. I mean, I've got about 20 grand of debt coming out of university. I've got into my final year next year, and I lived at home as well to try and save as much as I could living in London. And then I've got to pay that off before saving for a deposit on a house, and then potentially think about saving. It's just, my generation, my peers, for example, it's not something that we ever talk about, and it's something, there's a lack of financial education in schools even to make you aware of the potential that you need to save from this age to go forward.
But did students ever talk about pensions? Did you talk about pensions when you were a student? No.
But there was an automatic assumption you would save. there was a savings ethic which has gone. I mean, in the last 10 or 15 years, the culture of saving that we used to have has disappeared.
So is there any point saving? You're not going to get anything for your money if you do save.
Part of the problem, you know. Nearly half of pensioners, nearly half of UK pensioners need means-tested benefits to avoid poverty.
Yep.
That's the reality. You might look at the top half, but don't forget the bottom half.
We can't go
we
on
have
like
an
that.
issue.
We can't go on with
Exactly.
the system whereby people do make the effort, they do make the savings, and then all we come along and say is because you've saved, we're not going to give you any help. So what the state's got to do is give people a firm foundation, and when they do make those choices for themselves, they realise they're better off. And what we have to do for younger people, and we're going to start doing in the next few years, is automatically enrolling people through the workplace into pensions. They won't be forced, they can still opt out, but it will actually put it on the agenda of someone in their 20s, and they'll have to make a decision about that, but in a way that young people just haven't done in the past for understandable reasons.
This idea is a very good one, and it's something similar, I think, was proposed by Frank Field in the 1990s and was aggressively attacked by the Conservative Party. But the bottom line about this is actually pretty straightforward. If you want young people to save, you have to give them quite stable jobs. You have to ensure that they have decent housing. You have to ensure that the basics upon which they build their lives and find stability are there. Otherwise, they're not going to think about pensions. They're looking, you know, to desperately try and find out how they're going to pay their rent.
The point there is that the economic activity is not at a state where it can sustain people coming out of universities to go and get a job. So the white elephant in the room is that we need more jobs for people to go and earn money to therefore be able to save into pensions.
That's why this issue is so pertinent, because the story of the next 5 years and probably longer is going to be unemployment sticking at 3 million or higher. I think we're living through an historic economic policy mistake, the scale of deficit reduction, the coalition plans, and we're going to have young people are going to be bearing the brunt of that in the way that you've described. And although Ros is right, you know, of course there are people in their 50s and 60s and 70s who are not well off, you know. That is a fact of the income distribution. You know, as a cohort, it's done well.
Okay, we'll talk about some of this attitudes towards this cohort in a moment or two, because if we're really going to have to start living different kinds of lives in our dotage, or as some of us prefer to put it, in our prime, then we're going to have to rethink our ideas about old people. The mass media love young people because they make fashions, because they spend money, because the people who control the media are scared of them. Old people, on the other hand, are incompetent, smelly and out of touch. Stephen Smith, who aspires to be all those things, reports.
These retired people aren't nodding off in front of Countdown, as you can see, and nor are they racing down the Yorkshire Dales in tin bathtubs.
Do you come here often?
I do. You do? No, they're enjoying their weekly tea dance in Slough, and we were lucky enough to wangle an invite this afternoon. But, and here's our dilemma, are we reinforcing stereotypes about the retired just by being here? We're all Lotus Eaters at this dance club for the slightly more mature in years. But how well does the media capture life for the retired? Beautiful. Last of the summer wine about retired northern types was itself a kind of retirement home for Britain's comic actors.
The last of the summer wine, old people, is how we used to imagine old people, and still do up to a point, but we're not like that. The old people of that kind are a dying breed in every way. I don't think there will be old people like that in the future.
I mean, no matter what you buy nowadays, there's always got to be a problem. I mean, that was asking for trouble, wasn't it? Leaving Mrs. Warboys to mind the fort when this arrived. It's a whopper, isn't it, Mr. Meldrew?
Well, I think they are largely seen as rather comic and certainly limited figures with rather narrow interests. I think the media on the whole supposes that we're only interested in news if it's about pensions or natural health or those kinds of things, or yes, cures for Alzheimer's and so on.
The two parents, and Gavin and Stacey, are more like old people now. You know, they both dance till dawn. Alison Steadman is, you know, a terrific goer, but they're both old. They're retired, clearly. I think they're a much better example of old people now.
I give it lots of hit there.
That's it.
Have you noticed that? I do give it some hit. Very good. Back at the Tay Dansant in Slough, transported by the throbbing decks of DJ Dennis, we wondered what the Britwell Come Dancing Club made of the way their generation is represented in the media.
I think we get fairly well represented.
Well, they often make them look like they're 1 foot in the grave a lot of the time, and they don't realise that we're still active. We still feel quite young inside, and that's why if we get out to things like clubs and dances, you don't feel your age. You really are different, but they show it different in lots of ways. Don't you agree?
They still give it a kind of Darby and Joan.
Yes, exactly, yes.
Yeah. And I mean, the elderly people of today are more modern with it sometimes, more than what the youngsters are.
I mean, think of for teenagers. I have a lot of teenage grandchildren. I mean, they're stereotyped from morning till night. Sometimes with justice, I have to say, just as we are sometimes stereotyped with justice. But it's never very helpful, is it, to lump people into generations any more than any other category, really.
Now and again, whisper it, a stereotype can actually come in handy.
It's very nice to be able to play the old card, there's no question. Yes, I mean, I get out of millions of invitations that I can't bear. You know, oh, I think I used to be able to, but I don't think I can drive to Ely Cathedral to hear your goddaughter playing the oboe for charity. You know, phew, I'm a bit old. Very nice to be able to say that.
We're all embarked on a dance to the music of time, and age is no barrier to cutting a rug.